The wind always comes first. A low, endless howl that crawls across the land, slipping through cracks, rattling bones, and warning, far too late, that something ancient and merciless is approaching. Snow follows, erasing roads, homes, and finally, people. Tonight, you're about to step into 3 true blizzard horror stories. Stories pulled from real history, where ordinary men, women, and children were trapped inside storms so brutal they stripped away reason, hope, and humanity itself. These are not ghost stories. These are memories frozen into land. Story 1. The Children's Blizzard of 1888. On January 12, 1888, the Great Plains of America woke beneath a pale winter sun. Farmers stepped outside, checking livestock. Children trudged toward schoolhouses scattered miles apart across Nebraska and the Dakota Territory. The air was cold but manageable, nothing unusual for winter. By noon, the sky darkened unnaturally fast. The temperature dropped nearly 40 degrees in minutes. What followed would later be known as the Children's Blizzard. In a small wooden schoolhouse surrounded by endless white fields, a young teacher named Eva Hartwell tended to her students. The building was simple, rough-hewn boards, a single iron stove, frost creeping along the walls like pale veins. When the wind hit, it didn't feel natural. It slammed into the building with explosive force. Snow forced itself through cracks in the walls. Windows vanished behind white walls. The stove sputtered, struggling against the cold. Parents miles away realized too late that their children were trapped. Eva faced an impossible choice. If they stayed, the stove would die and the room would freeze solid. If they left, the storm could swallow them whole. She tied the children together using scarves, belts, anything she could find, forming a fragile human chain. The plan was to reach a nearby homestead less than half a mile away. They opened the door. The storm erased the world instantly. The wind knocked children off their feet. Snow filled lungs and blinded eyes. Direction vanished. The rope pulled tight, then jerked violently. One child fell. Another screamed. Eva felt the chain loosen in her hands as the wind tore them apart. She shouted names, but her voice dissolved into the storm. When the blizzard finally weakened hours later, search parties followed faint tracks that disappeared mid-stride. They found frozen boots without bodies inside them, mittens clenched around nothing. Some children were discovered frozen in place, faces twisted in terror, arms wrapped around one another. Others were found just yards from safety. Eva survived. She spent the rest of her life unable to sleep during winter storms. Neighbors claimed that when blizzards rolled across the plains, faint children's voices could still be heard, calling for their teacher, lost forever in the white. Story 2. The Diet Law Pass Incident. In February 1959, 9 Soviet hikers ventured deep into the northern Ural Mountains, experienced, disciplined, and well-prepared. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was meticulous, respected, and confident. Their destination was a remote mountain known by the local Mansi people as Kolit-Syakhl, Dead Mountain. The Mansi warned them. They said the mountain did not welcome humans, that the wind there spoke in screams, that people who entered during winter sometimes never returned or returned broken. On February 1st, the hikers set up camp high on an exposed slope. That night, something happened that would puzzle investigators for decades. When search teams arrived weeks later, they found the tent still standing, but it had been slashed open from the inside. Inside were boots, heavy coats, food and supplies, everything the hikers would have needed to survive. Barefoot tracks led downhill into the snow. One body was found near a burned-out fire, hands blackened and raw, as if clawing at flames. Another lay frozen between the tent and the trees, as if trying desperately to return. Further into the forest, 4 bodies were discovered in a ravine. Their injuries were horrifying. Crushed ribs, shattered skulls, massive internal trauma, yet no external wounds. One woman's tongue was missing. Another's eyes were gone. The official explanation cited an unknown compelling force. Modern scientists suggest a rare katabatic wind event, a sudden, invisible avalanche of air capable of flattening tents, triggering extreme panic, and producing infrasound that induces terror and hallucinations. Imagine lying in a tent as the mountain itself begins to roar. Pressure builds. Snow collapses the fabric. Your mind screams that staying means death. So you flee, barefoot, into a blizzard that offers no mercy. Even today, hikers report sudden waves of dread in Diet Law Pass. Electronics fail, compasses spin, and sometimes, during storms, people hear voices calling from the dark, speaking Russian, begging someone to come back. Story 3. The Donner Party. In the spring of 1846, the Donner Party left their homes with hope packed into every wagon. Farmers, craftsmen, mothers carrying infants, grandparents too stubborn to stay behind, all chasing the same dream whisper across America. California. Land, warmth, abundance. A place where winter didn't rule your life. They were not reckless people. They planned carefully, sold everything they owned, and joined a growing wagon train heading west along a route thousands had survived before. Then they heard about a shortcut. A man named Lansford Hastings promised a faster route, a bold new path called a Hastings Cutoff. He claimed it would shave weeks off the journey. His letters described smooth terrain, open valleys, easy passage. What he didn't say was that he had never guided a wagon train through it. Against the advice of experienced trail leaders, the Donner Party chose a shortcut. At first, the land fought them quietly. The trail vanished into dense brush. Wagons had to be dismantled and dragged by hand. Axes rang day after day as men hacked paths through trees that seemed endless. Progress slowed to a crawl. Tempers flared. Arguments erupted at night around weak campfires. Weeks slipped away. By the time they reached the Great Salt Lake Desert, the heat was merciless. Water ran out. Oxen collapsed mid-step, their bodies bloating under the sun. Families were forced to abandon wagons, heirlooms, furniture, pieces of their former lives left to rot in the dust. When they finally escaped the desert, winter was no longer a distant threat. It was waiting. By late October, the Donner Party reached the Sierra Nevada mountains. Snow had already dusted the peaks. They pushed forward desperately, knowing every day mattered. Then the first real storm hit. Snow fell hard and fast, burying the trail in hours. Wagons sank to their axles. Oxen refused to move, their breath coming out in panic clouds. Another storm followed, then another. Within days, they were trapped. They built crude shelters near what is now Donner Lake, using logs, wagon panels, and canvas. The cabins were dark, cramped, and barely insulated. Snow piled higher than the roofs, sealing them inside. Food ran out quickly, first when the cattle, then the dogs. Then the hides boiled into gluey soup. Children cried constantly, not from pain, but from hunger so deep it hollowed them out. Mothers turned their faces away, ashamed they had nothing left to give. People began to die quietly at night. Old age, sickness, starvation. The living wrapped the dead in blankets and dragged them into the snow. At first, graves were dug. Later, the ground froze solid. Soon, graves stopped being made. A small group attempted escape on homemade snowshoes. They became known as a forlorn hope. They vanished into the mountains carrying almost no food. Weeks later, only a few staggered out alive. Those who remained behind faced a truth no human should ever face. When the last scraps were gone, when the children could no longer stand, when the snow refused to melt, they crossed a line. At first, it was never spoken aloud. Meat simply appeared. Eyes avoided questions. Fires burned low as people ate in silence. Survivors later said the worst part wasn't the act. It was the waiting. Waiting for someone to die. Waiting for the storm to finish what hunger started. When rescue parties finally broke through months later, they were unprepared for what they found. Cabins filled with skeletal figures wrapped in rags. Pots containing human bones. Survivors who stared blankly, chewing slowly, as if afraid the food would vanish again. One rescuer wrote that the silence was unbearable. No cries of joy, no relief, just people who had gone somewhere far away and weren't sure how to come back. Many survivors never spoke of the winter again. Some couldn't smell cooked meat without shaking. Others woke screaming decades later, convinced the snow was rising inside their homes. Even now, Donner Pass carries a strange weight. Hikers report sudden cold spots during storms. The scent of cooking meat where no camps exist. Footsteps crunching behind them, stopping the moment they turn around. Shadows moving between snow-covered trees when visibility should be impossible. Locals say the mountain remembers, that it learned something about humans during that winter, and every blizzard it listens, waiting to see if hunger will ever make us cross that line again.